Hi there, we're at the Cronos Wyckoff session, and currently we'll start with the weekly chart as usual. That we look at the Wyckoff stage as well as the resistance and support levels. This time we have something new because a fellow member in the community requested to hoping to see Wyckoff in the daily chart. So let's give it a try, even though I prefer a cleaner weekly view. So let's begin, and remember, whatever happens in the daily chart, it's going to be restrained by what's happening in the weekly. So don't get overexcited when we get to the daily Wyckoff analysis. So here's the thing. Weekly, we already talked about there may be a sign of strength already. Obviously, we have seen the second test after the automatic rally, and then more tests. Just that this time the test seems to have stabilized much like the previous one, but like you see the shorter wicks, right? Let me enlarge this so it's clearer if you're watching on a smaller screen. So this time the wicks are shorter compared to what we have here. So during the selling climax, it tested all the way. Let me change this color. It tested the orange line, basically. That was around 7 cents. This time, at around this 8 cents range, it has stopped. So it hasn't gone all the way to the 7, the orange line. So that may be a good sign for some, but don't think it's over yet, because a lot of times these tests can go later, that goes deeper, much like what we have seen previously. So the earlier bigger cycles, these tests can go lower than the selling climax. So let's continue with what we have here, and then we'll move on to the daily chart in a second. So just quickly, the resistance, after we talk about these two support lines at 7 and 8 cents roughly, the first resistance will be here at around 10 cents. And then the next one, the blue one, will be like close to 12 cents, I would say. It's a rough, it's a rough range because it's pretty young for Cronos, and they're much less history compared to some other altcoins, older altcoins. So this is the weekly bigger picture that we would expect some kind of fluctuations and maybe a lower dip before it comes back up to test the white line again. But mainly it will be between the yellow and the white lines. So into the daily, the downward trend, well, it still hasn't broken outside of the downward trend, basically. So if I adjust it to it gets closer to the tips of the candles, the green cross we are having today is still having it like within the box. But like I mentioned before, probably 2 weeks back, Cronos is getting closer to its triangle. It's being cornered, and in the next few days, at most next Monday, it has to break out outside of this downward channel, or it's going to seek a lower support, like I said in the beginning, right? So in the weekly, I talk about this. It's going to bounce here, but then we know some of these tests can go lower than the selling climax. That's what it means when if the yellow support line doesn't hold here, if it's going to break to the downside, it's going to find a lower, this test is going to find a lower point than what we have seen over there. So well, a good thing, or an optimistic signal, is this is pretty flat so far for the past roughly 10 days. This may be a good sign that it has found support and would break to the upside, having a higher likelihood that it breaks to the upside. So hopefully that happens that way. If Now we are going to add in the interesting element of the daily Wyckoff. So let's borrow attack, and this, because the daily chart is more like we have more frequent candles, it's going to be way less noisier than the weekly, so it takes more time to actually gauge which exact Wyckoff stage that the daily chart is at. So however, let's have some fun and try to find out. Here, if we zoom out a little so we can see the pattern a little bit clearer, maybe with the help of the line chart as well, we see this looks like the accumulation period, and then this backup sign of strength, kind of the last point of supply, that kind of last point of support, that kind of range, and then a buying climax that seems to be where it is. Let me put in here so we can use that as a starting point. And then not weekly, I want to change it back to candlestick. So we have this red candle, that's the automatic reaction down from the buying climax, and then second test, you know it, and then sign of weakness. Yeah, we have all that. And then I'll skip some of sign of weaknesses. There is an upthrust, and we know the last point of supply, LPSY, and eventually came down to the preliminary supports. Yeah, you heard me say many times PlayStation, so I'm not going to make that joke again. That joke. So then here, excuse me, selling climax. So I've talked about there are some second tests or tests, just be simple tests. Obviously there was the automatic rally as well, this green candlestick over here. So you see it's going to be very busy trying to do Wyckoff in the daily chart. So let's do the previous accumulation cycle as well, since we have the current one. So we have this selling climax and automatic rally, and it's good that we have the sign of strength over here, and it's telling us after the sign of strength it can still come down before it goes up again, and that's the backup or last point of support period, and boom, there it goes. So I say that's roughly it. I can like continuously go all the way to do the rest, but that's not, we've got enough reference basically. So having these aren't going to help much because they're just repeating patterns. So the key thing is, when we are at this point, let's draw a line over here. That's where the automatic rally is. I'll change this to a green line and just make it appearing on this level. So if the price do break out of the downward trend and continues to hit or test this green line, this may well be the first sign of strength. So this may or may not happen, so it can go from sign of strength, retreat a little, and then already starting this leg of rise. So just two scenarios, right? It's easy to understand. One is without much of a dip, and then it builds up the momentum and eventually pump up. The scenario 2, dip a little, significant signal up, build up momentum continuously, and boom. So hope these two scenarios it's clear to you, and that's what we are trying to observe, whether it's going to happen over here. If it does, congratulations, and if you catch it. However, this period may not be as short, it can be a little bit longer, like over here. So give yourself a little bit of time to study how the project is going, whether there's sufficient community activity or business adoption, what's the dev team is releasing, what news they are releasing to the market. All that can contribute to how long and how quickly the price would fluctuate or pump up. So thanks for joining me. See you tomorrow. We'll be back to the big guy.